EA Sports. It's in the game.
Brain. It's in the game, brain. Yeah. Can you guess how many NBA games came out in the year 1999? Well, if you guessed 8, then you'd be correct. 8 whole standalone NBA games, each vying for a spot in the rotation. You can easily break these games down into a few simple categories. Subpar simulation games with incredibly average and sometimes terrible gameplay. Next is the sorely lacking NBA Jam sequels and spin-offs category. And then over here, you've got the good ones, consisting of NBA Live 2000 and NBA 2K. But let's focus our attention on the good ones. NBA Live 2000 was, like clockwork, back to play the role as the hardened veteran, putting up another all-star season as the gold standard for simulation basketball games. But tipping off against EA's juggernaut franchise was NBA 2K, Sega Sports' answer to Live's decade of dominance, launching just a few months after the Sega Dreamcast and boasting the best gameplay and graphics in the history of virtual hoops up until that point. And with its tight gameplay and groundbreaking visuals that absolutely posterized its competition, you might wonder, how did Sega do it? How did a company known for Blue Rodents doing zoomies and an endless catalogue of arcadey racing games create the best basketball game ever made at the time on their first attempt? Well, in this video, we're going to find out how, plot twist, this actually wasn't Sega Sports' first try at making a competitor to NBA Live, because just 2 years before NBA 2K launched, developer Visual Concepts and Sega Sports released NBA Action 98, an incredibly underrated and influential basketball game that laid a ton of foundation for NBA 2K. Its pixelated graphics don't exactly leap off the screen now, but for the time, its gameplay was incredibly fluid and in many ways superior to the NBA Live series that year, with a functional play calling system that made setting picks and lobbing alley-oops second nature. Its courtside camera, precise controls, and varied animations were all strengths the team at Visual Concepts would further refine just a few years later in NBA 2K. And to learn a bit more about how all of this happened, we're going to chat with one of the lead developers who worked on NBA Action 98 and the first NBA 2K, to get a better idea of how one of gaming's most successful franchises got started and why it was able to succeed right out of the gate.
Yeah, I think the main thing is I don't think people really realize we had worked with Visual Concepts on the Saturn game and how that's the foundation for NBA 2K, came from NBA Action 98. It's the same developers, Visual Concepts, same engine. It just had a different name. I don't think people saw that connection.
We'll then go and visit a gameplay designer from the first NBA 2K who's gonna offer up some super interesting insight into how the nuts and bolts of NBA 2K's gameplay design came together behind the scenes. So, by the mid-90s, developer Visual Concepts had cut their teeth with sports games like Madden 94 and NHL 97. They'd also infamously had their PlayStation version of Madden 96 cancelled by EA due to its subpar quality. But in 1996, the California-based studio was onto something good, now working on a new NBA game for the Sega Saturn that'd eventually be titled NBA Action 98. It's here that a guy called Marcus Matthews joins development as a producer for publisher Sega Sports. Marcus was a passionate basketball fan who was constantly frustrated when he played NBA games that were seriously lacking the complex mechanics and systems needed to bring the game to life. He was so frustrated about how badly NBA games tried to replicate low post scoring that he even spent his spare time making paper designs of what a low post scoring mechanic could look like if done right.
But there was just a lot of stuff in the 90s in basketball games. If you're a real basketball fan, you could tell those games were not designed by basketball guys. You could tell they were designed by game programmers or just casual fans of basketball who happened to get the project to do the game, because there's a lot of stuff that was missing as far as low post and how the guys moved on the court, and a lot of situational stuff that just wasn't being done, not because it wasn't technically possible, but they didn't have the game design nuances to connect the programming side to the game design. I mean, the main problem I was having, it was just killing me, believe it or not, was there was no sense of a low post game. No visual indicator that if I had a big man who was a center, when he got near the basket, he needed to turn and get into a low post type stance and turn away from the basket, and the guard needed to recognize that and feed the ball to him. And then you have this whole defense and offensive player low post battles. And those low post battles didn't exist back then. And it was very, very doable. It was not a complicated thing to do. It was just one of those things where probably because of schedule and small teams and not having a true passion for basketball, those are the kind of things that can get lost, but can add a lot to the realism and feel of experience. And my guys are backing guys down, doing jump hooks, doing spin moves, doing fadeaway post shots like Ewing did and Olajuwon did back then. That was by far the biggest. And then there's just a lot more smaller things that were doable that got lost in the shuffle.
He puts it up for three.
So, it's 1997 now, and Marcus and the team at Visual Concepts are in the weeds of development for NBA Action 98. And only a few months out from launch, he knew the game was not in good shape and made a bold proposal to delay and work on refining the gameplay until it was ready.
And so the gameplay was okay. And when I took it over, we were supposed to launch in the fall at the beginning of the NBA season. And I told Bernie, and I was like, this game is not ready. And Visual Concepts knew it wasn't ready. They were kind of running behind by the time I figured it out. And so we asked for a 5-month extension just to and launch it after the All-Star game, just to purely work on gameplay. Like the engine, the graphics, a base game was there, but it just didn't play fun, and it didn't play balanced or fun. So we literally had 5 months to really make it. I would say we took it from a C- D gameplay to about a B+ gameplay over those 5 months. And it's just a lot of little small things that we had to adjust to make certain players play more realistically. Just adjusting how guys moved on the court, certain formations, just making it feel more NBA, since nobody on the team were in-depth NBA guys.
For the foul. That's his first.
So, NBA Action 98 was not the blockbuster hit that Sega Sports had hoped it might be, but its great gameplay and overall polish had obviously made a big impression on Sega, because soon after they bought Visual Concepts and put them at the helm of developing a suite of NBA, NFL, and NHL games for their upcoming console, the Dreamcast, under the new 2K Sports brand. Marcus Matthews was then along for the ride as a senior producer for Sega Sports, and one of the first steps for crafting a true competitor to NBA Live started with unlocking the full potential of the Dreamcast's superior hardware.
And the biggest challenge that we had with NBA Action 98, once we got the gameplay up, was the graphics. The problem was the PlayStation PlayStation 1 had way better graphics than the Sega Saturn. So all the PlayStation, every game, football, basketball, look, the renderings, the textures, the lighting, those games look better than on the Saturn. Saturn textures look pixelated. We didn't have a lot of texture memory. So while our game played well, when you put it up against the PlayStation games, it didn't look well. And I'll never forget this. Probably the biggest experience after launching that game and looking at the reviews was that Sony's NBA game, which was done in England, I think, which played like soccer, and the guys felt like they ran like mud, did not play anything like the NBA game. The gameplay sucked, but it looked way better than ours game. And they got a higher review than ours. I was crushed. I was like, who is reviewing these games? These are not sports guys. These are not NBA guys. Our gameplay is way better than the Sony game. How's this game get a better review? But that set a real big trigger for us going into Dreamcast. Because then we knew, we got to go all out on the visuals because we got the gameplay here and we got to blow that out the window on the next generation system.
With a major victory.
With a massive boost in hardware horsepower, the NBA 2K team saw a massive increase in animation variety, from around 40 different moves in NBA Action 98 to as many as 1,100 in NBA 2K.
If I remember correctly, we probably were on the Saturn, we're probably like, for everything, we had like 1,500 polygons to work with. And I think on the PlayStation 1, it was like 2,000 and something. And we went from that. On Dreamcast, you could do 20,000 polygons at 60 frames per second. And even then, that 1,500 was at like 30 frames per second. So we literally had like a 20, 40x increase in visual quality. But that jump from barely doing 3D graphics, and a lot of people are still doing 2D, to get to the point where you can pretty much do all 3D well on the PlayStation 3 and Dreamcast, you'll never see that kind of visual jump again. And but we were able to take advantage of it. This is the first game where you really had different gate cycles for all the different player types of position. And what happens is when you have 5 different gate cycles and move cycles, the game feels more like real basketball. Before, everybody had the same run cycle, so that kind of got repetitive, and it didn't feel real. So that suspension of disbelief when we could do 1,000 animations. So we just went crazy with all kinds of special moves, counters, rotations, of course, all the low post stuff we got in there and was able to work out. So we made a huge leap in animations.
It might be hard to appreciate now, but creating a sports simulation where players could impact winning and losing in an intuitive and functional way wasn't always a guarantee. Even late into the 90s, NBA Live games have this very floaty and imprecise quality to them that make it hard to know how to tangibly affect the outcome of a game. This was something NBA 2K producer and playbook designer Derek Ayanaga was fixated on during development. He says he was a massive fan of Sega's decorated library of classic arcade games like Space Harrier, Crazy Taxi, and Sega Rally, which all rested on a rock-solid foundation of balanced gameplay where you always knew why you either won or lost. And this was the type of balance that Derek was excited to bring to NBA 2K.
You know, I really wanted to contribute to a game where, you know, the player had a really huge ability to make an impact, you know, again, on victory or losing. And what I mean by that is some of my most fondest memories were building and working on game mechanics where if people understood how it worked, if they understood how these interactions resolved, and if they had great timing, they could absolutely use that to their advantage to beat their opponent. It sounds very obvious and very simple, but it's actually quite complex to build, you know, to build a gameplay interaction that not only resolves when people do the right thing at the right time, but also gives players information and cues about when they should, you know, take action. It sounds like it's much more like designing and, you know, or building like a fighting game, but that's kind of the feel and the approach that I took to my own work. You know, like the areas that I had direct control over, is I really wanted that player to have unparalleled influence over success and failure and whether they won or lost, which I think at the time, you know, some of the other games that I played, a lot of the other games didn't really have that kind of edge or that cutthroat type of feel. You know, they seemed, from my own estimation, much more about sort of recreating statistics that, you know, that you saw in real life.
Derek says the playbook in NBA 2K was all about getting NPC AI to be in the right place at the right time, depending on the player's position on the court, as well as the individual tendencies of each team and player.
So by extension, it was like I'd end up designing the playbooks because in a lot of ways, that's how we determine overall team control. Like the way that we designed that system it was very much like player intent minded. So again, if we go back to that philosophy, is what am I trying to do as a player? What am I trying to accomplish? Whatever that might be, essentially I want the other 4 AI controlled players to kind of follow suit, right? It's very, I don't know, it seems very obvious now. But one of the things that me and one of the gameplay engineers kind of worked out was, well, why don't we just try this system, super simple, where the other 4 AI controlled teammates basically just position themselves based on where you move around on the court. But the first go at it was actually quite simple, and maybe that's part of the beauty of it, right? It wasn't like you didn't have to be a basketball coach to get basketball, like reasonable basketball behavior out of it, if that makes sense.
After we first spoke, a bunch of other questions popped into my head about the specifics of how player AI worked in NBA 2K. So in a follow-up email, Derek kindly offered up a bit of broader clarity about how these different systems actually worked. He said the drive and dish system would collapse defenses in a far more dramatic way than real games, to open up shooters more effectively if you beat somebody off the dribble. It was a similar logic to open shooters, who would stay behind the 3-point line if they were better statistical shooters, whereas average shooters would stand closer in. And what probably piqued my interest the most was the way the AI handled fast break situations, because most other NBA games were at the time really disorganized with transition, causing players to clump together on the break and really ruin the immersion. Whereas 2K's system was all about quickly creating the fast break experience by getting players that were behind the action to drift to the back of the pack and be removed from the play. And what you get is a very dynamic fast break system compared to other games. Derek says all of these very basic but powerful behaviors were all in service of having simple gameplay systems be reliable, meaning players could pick up patterns and clearly understand how to develop strategies and exploit mismatches. And over 2 decades later, he's still super proud of the impact he had on the early days of the franchise.
For my part of it, I didn't necessarily go in as being like this huge, massive NBA fan, but I actually became one through part of that process. I think what I brought to the equation was my ability to take something that somebody described as being a memorable moment or something that's important when it comes to like an NBA highlight, and then being able to translate that and help build a system that allows players to kind of feel some of those moments and relive and experience what it's like to be able to deal with those challenges as an NBA player and then make something great happen. It's always a good feeling, to be part of the early heritage of that game and setting up the foundations for it. So it sounds kind of funny, maybe almost like from a parental point of view, but definitely proud of the team and what they've been able to accomplish since. It's incredible to see how far the game has advanced.
NBA 2K may not have been an immediate usurper to NBA Live's throne, but a few strange events eventually aligned the series in the perfect position to take the crown about a decade after it debuted. Most importantly, the Sega Dreamcast was not a success, despite its historic sales at launch. Sega never made another console and eventually sold off Visual Concepts and the entire 2K Sports brand to Take-Two Interactive in 2005 for just $24 million. This led to the immediate formation of publisher 2K Games, putting NBA 2K in the hands of a massive publishing juggernaut that was ready to go to war with EA Sports. Within about 5 or 6 years of the purchase, the series had far surpassed the quality of the Live series, and today in 2022, NBA 2K has literally no other competition on the market, which speaks a lot to the way these games are made now. Long gone are the days where 8 NBA games with a massive spectrum of quality could flood the market in a single calendar year. The threshold for what a functional NBA game has to be successful in 2022 is worlds away from what was expected at the end of the last century. And although NBA 2K is full of problematic stuff today, like its really awful microtransactions and the convoluted mess that is my career, it's important to remember that there was a time when all developers wanted was to create better basketball games, ones where winning and losing was in the player's hands, where getting gameplay and graphics polished to a fine sheen was the rule and not the exception, where developers like Visual Concepts could go from a rough around the edges first try to changing sports games forever. At least, that's how developers like Marcus Matthews want people to remember NBA 2K's legacy by.
People didn't realize how grand of a vision we had about changing the sports game landscape. Of course, that sounds gaudy, but we really were trying to do stuff that had never ever been done before, and we were able to pull it off.
Hey, thanks so much for checking out this video. Hope you enjoyed it. I think I started work on this video in some way, shape or form over a year ago. The interviews you saw in the video were over a year old too. This was the video that I was working on when I had a bit of a mental health crisis last year, which if you saw my last video, you'd know a bit about. Thanks so much to everybody who checked out my latest video and left some kind comments. And I hope all you out there, being kind to yourselves and, taking care of yourselves, basically. I felt it was worth saying too that I actually really like the NBA Live series, NBA Live 2004 and 2010 specifically. Awesome NBA games that still hold up really, really well. And I hope the NBA Live series does make some kind of comeback soon, because I think 2K needs a bit of a kick in the ass, to be honest. A bit of competition. I think that'd be good for everybody involved. You know what you need to do if you want to check out more of my content. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.